Ever feel like you're standing in front of a mountain of tools and you're supposed to build a website but no idea where to start? It's kind of how it feels with web development sometimes, right? So many frameworks, so many different things to learn.
Yeah, it could definitely be overwhelming.
But that's why we're here, right? Today we're diving into ReactJS, which is like, think of it as your blueprint for these really cool dynamic websites, like the kind that just feels super smooth and interactive.
Exactly. React is all about making those kinds of websites easier to build.
So the source material describes ReactJS as, and I quote, a JavaScript library, end quote. Sounds a little, I don't know, technical.
Right.
What does that even mean for someone who maybe doesn't have a computer science degree but wants to build something cool?
Yeah, so in the simple terms, a JavaScript library is basically like a well-organized toolbox.
Okay.
It has these pre-built components and functions that you can just grab and use. Imagine, like, instead of building a house brick by brick, you have these pre-made walls and windows.
Okay, I like that.
You just assemble them. And that's what React does. It gives you these pre-built pieces to speed up development.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you want to build a new feature.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Now, to actually start building, the source material mentions Node.js and NPM. And I have to be honest, those sound a little intimidating.
Yeah, those are just the tools of the trade. Like, you wouldn't build a house without a hammer, right?
Right.
Node.js is like, it basically lets you run your JavaScript code, which is what React is built on outside of a web browser. And then NPM is how you get all those pre-built components we were talking about.
Okay, so it's like going to the hardware store and getting your supplies.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's that easy.
So no computer science degree required yet, but the source material keeps mentioning components, these things called components.
Yeah,
here.
components are crucial in React.
How do those fit into this whole analogy? Like if we're building a house or whatever, what are the components?
So components are basically the building blocks of your application. Right. So let's say you're building that website.
Okay.
You might have a header component, a navigation bar component, a sidebar component, and so on. And the beauty of components is that they're reusable. So if you design, let's say, a really nice button component, you can use that same component multiple times throughout your application.
So it's not like I have to rebuild that button every single time.
Okay.
It's like one button to rule them all kind of thing.
Precisely. And it makes your code much more organized and easier to maintain because you're not repeating yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've got the components figured out, but then the source material dives into props and state. And I'm not going to lie, this is where I usually start to get a little lost.
Yeah, props and state can be a little tricky to grasp at first.
Yeah.
But they're super important concepts in React.
Is there a way to explain these without, like, making my head explode?
I'll try my best. So think of props like passing down information from a parent component to a child component.
Okay.
It's a way for components to communicate with each other.
So it's like, I don't know, like sending a message in a bottle from one component to the other.
Kind of, yeah.
know?
It's like sending a message down the line. Now, state, on the other hand, is more about a component's internal data.
Okay.
It's like, think of it as a component's memory. So if you have a button, for example, and clicking that button changes something on the page, that change is managed by the component state.
So props are for passing down instructions, and state is how the component itself kind of remembers and manages what's going on inside of it.
You got it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got components talking to each other with props. They've got their own internal memory with state. But a website's more than just these isolated components, right?
Right, that's where routing comes in.
Okay, so how does routing help us connect all these different pieces?
Imagine you're browsing a website. You click on, say, About Us, and the content changes without the entire page reloading.
Yeah.
That's routing in action.
Okay, so instead of those clunky full page reloads, we've got this nice smooth transition between different sections of our website.
Precisely. It creates a much smoother user experience. And React has a really popular library specifically for handling routing.
Okay, is that React Router thing I saw mentioned in the source material?
Yeah, exactly.
So React Router, if I'm understanding this right, is kind of like the traffic director of our website. It decides which component to show based on the link that's clicked.
That's a great way to put it. You essentially define different routes for your application.
Okay.
And each route is associated with a specific component.
Okay, so let's say we're building that online store, right? We'd have different routes for like the home page, product pages, a shopping cart maybe, things like that.
Exactly. And React Router would ensure that the correct component is rendered when the user visits those different URLs.
Okay. So how does this whole routing thing work with our to-do list app, though? It seems like a simple concept, routing, for something like an online store, but how would you use it with a to-do list?
Even with a to-do list, routing can be really useful. Let's say you want to filter your to-dos. You could have like all tasks, active tasks, completed tasks.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And with React Router, you can make those filters into links, and each link would correspond to a slightly different route.
Okay, so when you click on completed tasks, the URL might change a little bit, but the page doesn't fully reload. It just shows you the completed tasks, which is pretty cool.
Exactly. It's a really elegant way to handle navigation within a single page application.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've covered components, props, state, and routing. That feels like a pretty good foundation, right?
It is, but there's always more to learn with React. The source material also dives into some more advanced concepts.
Okay, yeah, because I saw advanced concepts like in big, bold letters and was like, ooh, what's next? Ooh! So what are some of these next level things that we can do with React?
So once you've mastered the basics, there's a whole other level of React that you can explore. Things like managing what's called global state with context API.
Context API, okay.
Yeah, and then creating custom hooks to streamline your code.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's performance optimization, which is a whole other beast.
Okay, so it's like we've built our website house, it's standing, it's functional, but now we're going into like, maybe add some solar panels, some smart home features.
Exactly.
Make it fancy. Okay, so tell me more about these upgrades. What can we do with, you said the context API?
Yeah, so context API is really helpful for managing data that needs to be accessible by many different parts of your application.
Yeah.
Think of it like instead of passing data down through each individual component,
Okay.
you have this central hub of information that any component can access.
So instead of those messages in a bottle, we've got like a global announcement board that everyone can see.
Yeah, something like that. It's really helpful for things like user settings, for example.
Okay.
Where you don't want to have to pass that information down through every single component.
Right. So like if someone's like, I want dark mode, you don't have to tell every component on the page to swear dark mode individually.
Exactly. Yeah, you can just update it in one place.
That's super handy. Okay, what about those custom hooks? Those sounded intriguing.
Yeah, custom hooks are a way to extract reusable logic from your components. So let's say you have some code that you use in multiple places.
Right.
You can pull that code out into a custom hook and reuse it throughout your application, which is great for keeping your code DRY.
DRY.
Don't repeat yourself.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
It's a programming principle.
So it's like having like a handyman come in and be like, oh, you need that fixed in multiple places. Okay, well, I've got a tool for that. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. Custom hooks are all about making your code more efficient and maintainable.
And then there's performance optimization, which I feel like there's a whole other like can of worms, but we'll save that for another deep dive, I think. We could do a whole episode on performance optimization alone.
So we've gone from the building blocks of React to some pretty advanced stuff. But you said it earlier, and I think it's worth repeating, even with all these fancy features, sometimes the best way to learn is to just start building, right?
Absolutely. And, a to-do list app is a perfect project for that. It's simple enough that you can focus on the core concepts of React.
Okay.
But it also has enough complexity that you can start to experiment with some of these more advanced features as you get more comfortable.
So let's actually talk about building that to-do list app step by step. What are the first things someone would need to do to get started? All right, so let's break this to-do list thing down into like manageable steps. Where do we even start?
So the first thing you'll want to do is set up a new React project. And luckily, there's this really handy tool called Create React App that'll basically generate a basic React app structure for you so you don't have to start from scratch.
Okay, that's always good because I feel like starting from scratch is just asking for trouble.
Exactly. It takes care of all the initial setup for you.
Okay, so once we have our project set up, we've got this blank slate. What do we build first?
So then we start thinking about, okay, what are the components we need for our to-do list app?
Okay, so what kind of components would we need for a simple to-do list?
So at a minimum, we'd probably want an input field where the user can type in their tasks. And then we'll need a way to display those tasks, so probably a list component. And then each task within that list could also be its own component.
Okay, so we're like breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Exactly. Breaking it down into components makes everything more organized and easier to work with.
Gotcha. Okay, so then how do we actually manage the tasks themselves? Like, how do we store them? How do we keep track of them? That's where the whole state thing comes in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the component that's responsible for displaying the list of tasks, that component would use state to keep track of those tasks. So every time you add a new task, check off a task or delete a task, that component's state will be updated.
Okay.
And when the state updates, React automatically re-renders the component to reflect those changes.
Okay, so it's like we're not directly telling it like, hey, put this on the screen, cross that off the screen. We're telling the state this is what's happening, and then React just figures out the rest.
Exactly. Yeah, you're just managing the data, and React takes care of updating the user interface for you, which is really nice.
Yeah, that is really nice. I like that. Okay, so then how do we actually make those actions work? Like if I want to click a button that says mark as complete, what makes that button actually do something?
So each individual task item component, the one that displays the task text, would also handle those button clicks.
Okay.
So when you click mark as complete, it would trigger a function within that component.
And that function, does it like, I don't know, cross out the text directly or something?
Not directly, no. So that function actually updates the state of the parent list component. So it tells the list component, hey, this task has been marked as complete, and then the list component's state updates, and that triggers the re-render.
Okay, so it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
I tell the button tells the list tells React, React's like, all right, I got this, and then it crosses it off the list.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Okay, cool. Now I'm thinking like, okay, I build this awesome to-do list, I add all my tasks, I'm super productive, but then I close the tab, I close my browser, they're gone, right? Like back to square one.
Well, not necessarily. That's where we can use something called local storage.
Local storage, yeah, I've heard of that. It's how websites remember your preferences and stuff, right?
Exactly. So local storage lets us store data in the user's browser. So even if they close the tab or browser, that data is still there when they come back.
That is super useful. I always wondered how that works. So how do we actually use local storage in our little to-do list app?
So it's actually pretty straightforward. We can save our array of tasks to local storage whenever the state updates. And then when the app loads, we check if there's any data in local storage. And if there is, we use that data to initialize the state of our list component.
Okay, so it's like every time I make a change, it's like saving it to my computer, basically, so that next time I open it up, it remembers where I left off.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a really handy way to persist data in a web application.
This is cool. I like this. So we've taken this whole React thing, we've broken it down, and now we've built an actual functional to-do list app that can actually be useful.
Yeah. And the best part is, this is just scratching the surface of what you can do with React.
Well, expert speaker, this has been a whirlwind tour of the world of ReactJS. But honestly, I think we laid a really good foundation today.
I agree. And remember, the key is to keep learning, keep experimenting, and most importantly, have fun building awesome things.
Couldn't have said it better myself. A huge thank you to expert speaker for, taking us on this journey. And all of you listening, we'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.